Ja, hallo und herzlich willkommen hier
Hello,
im
I wish you a warm welcome in the virtual venue of the Federal Foundation for the Study of the Communist Dictatorship in East Germany. A warm welcome to all international guests of our discussion tonight. We will have the discussion in English and German, and we are very glad to have such an international a number of participants. My name is Tamina Kutscher. I am the editor-in-chief of the online platform decoder.org. This is a platform that is dedicated to Russia and Belarus. Today evening, however, we want to talk about transitional justice. This is a series of events. And today we want to talk about different countries, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. The Federal Foundation for the Study of the Communist Dictatorship in East Germany and the Federal Government Commissioner for the New Federal States invited you jointly to participate in this series of events, which aims to talk about different kinds and aspects of societal and legal reappraisal processes. This series will take place until May 2022. Our today's topic is new structures or old networks, transitional justice in Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. I warmly welcome 4 renowned experts of these countries who tonight are going to give us insights and personal experience on this topic. Ladies first, Mrs. Professor Dr. Dagmara Jajeśniak-Kwast. She is the director of the Center for Interdisciplinary Polish Studies at the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt-Oder. She is an economic historian and she conducted research on the post-socialist transformation in Poland. The question, new structures or old networks in Poland, is answered by her in the following way. The answer to this question is difficult and is perceived differently by the different political camps in Poland. There was no system change, however, is possible without the old structures. We are going to talk about this tonight. A warm welcome, Mrs. Jajeśniak-Kwast. Let me continue in alphabetical order. A warm welcome to
Lubomir Mohrbacher.
Guten Abend.
Guten
Slovakia,
Abend, Herr Mohrbacher.
to Dr. Lubomir Mohrbacher. Good evening, Mr. Mohrbacher. Good evening to Bratislava. Dr. Mohrbacher is a historian. He works at the Slovak National Memory Institute in Bratislava. He works on the topic of documentations, and he mainly deals with the legal reappraisal of the communist dictatorship in Slovakia. He has written some international publications. For example, he wrote about crimes of the communist regime in Slovakia. On our question, whether it's more about new structures or old networks, Lubomir Mohrbacher says, many former members of the Communist Party who today hold the offices of state prosecutors and independent judges of the democratic state. This can hardly be perceived as a guarantee of coming to terms with the communist past. This is also something that we are going to talk about. Welcome, Dr. Mohrbacher. Now we come to the neighboring country. Both countries have a common past, the Czechoslovak past, which falls into the time of communism. A warm welcome to Dr. Oldřich Tuma. He's the director of the Institute of Contemporary History at the Academy of Sciences of the Czech Republic. He's a renowned researcher and knows the Czech history very well. He's the member of very many international institutions, for example, of the Academic Council of the European Network, Remembrance and Solidarity. Many also know him because of his publications, for example, on the Prague Spring. And he's also an academic advisor. He was academic advisor for the annual report on the historical research in communism 2008. Mr. Tuma answered our first question in the following way. The Czech legal system has two main tasks: the rehabilitation of and compensations for the victims of the communist repressions and the punishment of the offenders. The first task was dealt with quite successfully. But the second one, the punishment of the offenders, remained a mere attempt. Welcome, Dr. Tuma.
Guten Abend, or better.
Good evening.
Good evening, because I will speak in English. I have to say something. I'm not anymore director of the institute. I used to be for almost 2 decades, but today I'm senior research fellow of the same institute. So just to make it correct.
Wunderbar, danke für diese
Great.
Korrektur.
Thank you for this. So you're still in the same institute, but have a different function. Thank you very much, Dr. Tuma. And last but not least, let us go to Budapest, to Hungary. Welcome, Dr. Christian Umari. He is a historian. He studied German studies. He writes and does research on the history of the state security of Hungary between 1945 and 1990. He also dealt with right-wing extremism, anti-Semitism in Hungary. Many in Germany know him because of his comments and analysis in German media. Dr. Umari, just as most of our participants speaks German very well. Welcome, Dr. Umari. Welcome to you. Thank you very much. And I will read out your statement. And with this, I will continue with my first question to you. You said that instead of old networks, today we rather have servants. Fidesz, the government party, created new structures of power to an unprecedented extent. Dr. Umari, what do you mean when you say servants? And when you speak about new structures of power or of power relations, what do these new power relations mean for the reappraisal of communism? Well, a network or a clique is something that was typical of the communist dictatorship, something that the sovereign is still using today in order to secure their power. However, in Hungary, we don't see this situation. However, what we can see and what we should talk about is that many people found new positions in a new political system. Basically, this is nothing new. In Germany, after 1945, there were many such cases. The problem, however, is that many people do not reappraise the communist system. For example, when it comes to the responsibility of our today's Minister of the Interior, who in the communist time was a party secretary in the Ministry of the Interior. He was in a relatively high function, and there it is no topic at all. However, when we talk about opposition members, then this is a very prominent topic, particularly in the state media. And this is what I mean when I say servants. Politics of memory and the reappraisal of a former system, of our former system, is completely taken away from science. It is instrumentalized for the today's government. You say that the power relations are structured in a new way, and you say that politics of memory and history is taken away from science. What does this mean for the reappraisal of the past? On the one hand, this means that the Fidesz government creates new structures. That means there is, for example, the Academy of Sciences, and next to this academy and its institutions, there are many new institutions which are not renowned at all, which are not qualified for their publications or other things, but they get much more funding than the Academy of Sciences. There were not less than 6 institutions which were founded in the recent past with the purpose of rewriting the history of the 20th century. So this is a great place for historians because they can get very many different jobs in Hungary. However, it is very obvious that this is nothing less than propaganda. I will tell an example, and maybe this is also interesting for my Slovak colleague. For 1,000 years ago, there was the Battle of Bratislava, which was then still called Pressburg. This battle was won by the Hungarians. And recently, a film was shot about this battle because this was taken as the new point of identification, where the good ones were killing the bad ones from the West. And now this gets a kind of meaning just as the end of the Second World War. Because this battle is now used as a forebear of the fight that we now fight, for example, against the villains of the EU. It is that simple, actually. So the revolutionary Hungarians fighting against the evil, which is the EU. Okay. How did we get there? What are the reasons? There is this famous saying of Joseph Antar, why didn't they make a revolution? In Hungary, this very smooth transition to democracy which very many functionaries were part of, is this maybe a reason why this was not dealt with, or was the revolution lacking?
So I think it's not only about the revolution, but there are other reasons for it compared to Poland and Slovakia. So Hungary, the Hungarian state, is a state of losers, and this is part of our history. And that means that the relationship with the West or liberalism in general and social market economy is different compared to Poland and Slovakia and other countries, for example, which means freedom or liberty or the national independence on one side, which is celebrated today, is on the other side, is seen as the big catastrophe of history. And this definitely promotes extreme forces and nationalist forces, and people are turning back to their homeland, to the east, so Russia, for example, or other countries, because they consider them being good examples. And the president himself was Viktor Orban, has now a seat in the Turkish Council, and Orban is he's a very welcome guest, always been welcome here in Hungary, and he is not criticized at all. No, it's the opposite. And I hope, or I think that in Poland this wouldn't be possible, or in the Czech Republic. So this is the current situation. We received a question from the audience. So the audience is very much invited to ask questions, to raise questions in order to deepen the information. And this is a very concrete one. So what should have happened in 1989 and 1990 in Hungary in order to stabilize or to make this current democracy more stable? What should have happened? Well, I don't know what to say, to be honest, because I think I should write a big essay on it. So many people have been involved, and there we don't have this manual, this single answer to it. But I think one problem is that the European Union isn't strong enough, and this is a big problem. Because you need strength in order to be able to implement and to realize your values. And I think the European Union is definitely a lame duck. And this is definitely used, this is abused in Hungarian politics. And I think the people being in charge and are those talking about values, but not being able to fight for them, to advocate for the values. And I think this is definitely something difficult, and this is something that has been prescribed or described by others, but neither Germany nor Poland can dictate the Hungarians what to do and how to deal with their past and how to come to terms with their past. And I think this is definitely something weird. Just imagine a Hungarian historian telling Germans or Polish to how to come to terms with the past, and this would be strange nevertheless. So I think the problem is that the big political or the main political camps in Hungary did not understand that it was important to deal with these systems of injustice, of this injustice or the wrong committed by communism, and to understand what happened. And for example, the liberty, the freedom of documents has been one basis, and why this has been used in order to prosecute specific things that happened in the past. So we do have this freedom, of this liberty of documents or of official files, and then on the other hand we had criminal procedures. And I think the Czech Republic is a good example for this, and we could take this as an example. But compared to Hungary, in the Czech Republic and Poland and in Slovakia, there has been legal procedures taken, or there has been some kind of, let's say, reappraisal of the past, but in legal terms. Thank you very much, Mr. Umari, for this very interesting contribution. Now, I would like to come back to Poland. So I think there are definitely parallels when it comes to your country and Hungary. So talking about EU skepticism, critique towards the European Union, and say a paradox situation when it comes to the reappraisal or the process of coming to terms with the past. And you said that the anti-communism is something that is promoted by all the different parties in Poland, but it's, let's say, interpreted differently. Talking about anti-communism after the parliamentary elections in 2015 became the raison d'etat, the reason of state itself in Poland. Can you please give us some extra information on this comment? So this is a thesis I made, or a sentence. This is a thesis of my PhD student, because I do learn from my students, and she writes a thesis on the anti-communism in Poland at our institute, and she says that especially after the elections that took place in 2015, the PiS government, PiS government, is like a motor, like an engine for reforms, and also for the reform of the good change, and that this is definitely taking place in the spirit of anti-communism, but also the latest publications of Francis Mirat, for example, is dealing with the transitional justice in Poland. And these publications show that the PiS government administration uses this in order to extend their power position and to enhance the power position. And it was really interesting to hear this information from Hungary. And I think this was a scenario that I have been observing for years with great concerns. And of course, I'm always asking the question, in which direction would Poland go? But nevertheless, the reforms of the good change, of the so-called good change, have been taken place under the cover of, let's say, I won't say vengeance, but nevertheless dealing with old cliques. And there have been a reorganization at all levels. And I think the negative aspect is that the governing party, the ruling party, on one side propagates this anti-communism debate, but nevertheless they use methods that have been typical for 1989 and before. So when you think about the violence of the different powers, then this has definitely, there is a relation to the legislative and, of course, the ruling party. I mean, this is democracy, but nevertheless, when we think about the other powers, then the judiciary is used, and there have been reforms taken place under the cover of these old boys' networks, or old elites, and they exchange these elites, but it's just, well, let's say a process of exchanging in order to create a new party and to lead new elites. And I think what is even more dangerous in Poland, and there have been huge, big protests and taken place in Poland, is the limitation, the restriction of the freedom of opinion, of speech. And I think the latest developments showed that independent newspapers have been bought by state companies. There has been a privatization taken place of the Polish broadcasting companies, and this is dangerous. And of course, it works because it is under this cover, it takes place under this cover of anti-communism. And this is, in my opinion, this is a huge problem. Of course, many people criticize this, and here in the German media, there was a photo by Lech Wałęsa with his T-shirt, and he wore the slogan "Constitution, Constitution." And what are the developments when it comes to, for example, Solidarność and the government in Poland? This is definitely a relationship that is divided and split at the same time. And we have to go back to history, definitely. Solidarność has never been a homogeneous organization. It was let's say, an organization that has been formed in order to be successful, in order to fulfill a purpose, and in order to create, to organize this new change in Poland. But there have been different camps within the organization, and after the first parliamentary elections that have been taking place where more than 100 political parties were in the game, let's say, then we could have seen, or we've seen, that it's a bit scattered. So after the change, after the wall came down, after the fall of communism, Solidarność was kind of scattered. So it's like an old couple, only the children keep them together, and when the children are out of left home, they split up. And I think one problem is the relationship between the different, well, when it comes to independence and freedom of the country, and between Solidarność and Wałęsa, there is this huge problem regarding the relationship between the two organizations. And I'm not sure when it came to Lech Wałęsa for example. I don't know whether it was a good thing or not. I think it was maybe a good thing for him and also for Poland, but I'm not sure whether this is 100% the case. And I don't know regarding the book that has been published in, or that was published in 2008, unveiling his relationship with the state security in Poland. And I think we should be more, let's say, straight. We should come to terms with this past and talk about it openly. And I'm very sad, or it is sad in general, to observe how the old elites that conducted before the round table took place in '88, that were involved in the peaceful negotiations with the communists, that it was indeed possible to negotiate and to discuss with the communists without bloody protests or violent protests. And today we live in a free country, and we are part of the European Union, and it is a different situation, and this really makes me sad. And I'm very much okay with what Ms. Songberry said. So I think the Poles should not only rely on the European Union, and I think it's not only about implementing or realizing the values of the European Union, but it's also a question of financing. And I think my colleague from Danzig, Mr. Keski, he is the head of the Danish Center in Danzig, and he said that it's not only about the government channels, and it's not only about European funds, it's also about NGOs and self-fulfillment and organization. And I think the situation in Poland could have been different when there have been other, let's say, instruments or other ideas, and not only European tax money used. And I think this is the big problem.
Thank you very much for this very critical insight into Poland. Let us go further with our round. Let's go to the Czech Republic. Mr. Tuma, everything looked so well. In 1989, 1990, Václav Havel was a former dissident. He came to power. He became the president. From 1990, there was rehabilitation, restoration. In 1991, the Act on Lustration was taken. 1993, the Act on the illegitimacy of the communist regime, and so on and so on. So the list is endless. There was the Act on victim compensation, and so on. Today, Andrej Babiš, a former member of the state security, is the president of the Czech Republic, and his party also relies on the votes of the communists. How is such a situation possible? And what does this tell us about how the Czechs deal with the past? Is it a sign of reconciliation, or rather of pushing things aside?
This is a difficult question, especially for me, more a question for a political scientist, for a historian. But anyway, so thinking according to the title of this discussion, new structures, old networks, I would start by saying that in fact, old networks doesn't play such an important role in Czech Republic today, and Andrej Babiš definitely is not a representative of old structures, old networks. He used to be a very random figure before 1989, and so. If I should think about your question, I would say today we have in Czech Republic new structures. You mentioned Václav Havel and other people and their background in Charter 77 or in opposition against the regime before 1989. or people from 1968, they still played a role in years after 1989. So in the 90s, they definitely were new structures, new political parties, president, and so on. So in most important political parties, Civic Democratic Party, Social Democratic Party, all, but ever people from former anti-regime resistance and quite important role. And also those political parties or the elites of the 90s or maybe the second decade had a certain memory policy and certain attitude towards the communist past. Somehow, I don't want to go into the details. In the first decade of this century, those traditional political parties somehow discredited themselves because of corruption, inefficiency, and so on. So maybe they deserve it, maybe not. But in fact, during the last 10 years, you can see complete change in the political scene, the Czech Republic, and today, I would say, we still have those political parties, but in fact not very successful and even not very important. But the two most important political forces of today in the Czech Republic is ANO, so the movement of Andrej Babiš, with focus on economic efficiency and like that. So I have never heard Andrej Babiš to say anything real about the past. Something he speaks about his own past as a former collaborator of the state security, so he denies it and so on. But communist past doesn't mean anything for ANO in their political agenda. And the other party, which is in opposition, but today, according to the public screening, it seems that they will win the next elections, is the Pirate Party. The party, Pirates, very young people, very modern people, so therefore ecology, climate, issues of climate, e-government, things like that. So the leader of that party, Ivan Bartoš, and maybe future prime minister, he was just 40, so he was 9 years in the time of the change. So again, I have never heard those young new politicians to speak anything serious about the communist past and so on. So
finden Sie das gut oder schlecht? Sie selber.
And what do you yourself, do you think that's good or bad? Is reappraisal no longer a topic for the Czechs?
Quite natural consequence of very strong memory discourse or past discourse. So the anti-communist discourse dominated Czech public space in the 90s and maybe in the next decade too. So all elections from 1990 until 1210 or something like that were dominated by anti-communist campaign. In fact, it was about communism, but it was also a campaign from the side of the right-wing parties, so Civic Democratic Party against Social Democrats, and so on and so on. And somehow it didn't reflect that for many people there are new problems, new issues. They have difficult life, but which is rooted in the present problems. So I don't know, some people are without employment and so on and so on. So those issues of corruption and so on. And it seemed to me that somehow the public was more and more tired of this past focused discourse. Yeah, and suddenly there was Babiš with not this very past, personal past, but he started to speak about other things. So we have to lead the state in a very different way. We have to look into the future. And I can promise you that all of us will be rich, and so on and so on. And the parades, those young guys, they have a rhetoric, so partly anti-capitalism, but it's not a rehabilitation of old-style communism and so on. So it's hard to say if it's good or bad.
Also es ist nicht mehr die Hauptbeschäftigung.
So it's no longer the main task of the Czech politics and the Czech society.
This is maybe, if you look on mass media, so it's still an important question. And of course, some politicians and journalists and so on, maybe many, some try to use this anti-communist discourse against Babiš, because Babiš used to be a member of Communist Party before 1959. He used to be a collaborator of state security. So in economic issues, he didn't inform the police about any political activities and so on. But anyway, yeah. But somehow it didn't work. So Babiš, for many years, his movement had around 30% of support, which never happened. So between elections for such a long time and so on. So this anti-Babishism, I think, cannot be just anti-communism. So I think the rates, young guys, they understand that there are other weak points in Babiš and in his government and so on. So this is necessary to speak about and so on. So it seems to me that, well, I'm a historian, I can regret it, but it seems to me that past is past.
Sagen Sie als Historiker.
This is what you say as a historian. That's interesting. But when it comes to the reappraisal of this past, which you deal with, would you say that you have done a good job? Because today, otherwise, it would be different? Or are there things that you would still wish the Czech Republic to achieve?
You don't have easy questions. That's why we are here. Again, I mentioned, for instance, this issue of transitional justice. So definitely failed. So there were some cases when the perpetrators or offenders were brought to trial and even sentenced, and some of them ended in prison for some time and so on. But not many. And usually what made the public nervous and so on was that those trials and the investigation went slow, and it lasted years and years and so on. In fact, it's not only the problem of Czech transitional justice, but of the Czech justice generally. So if people expected that there would be something like a justice and the perpetrators, I mean the offenders or those who are responsible for this policy will be punished. Mainly, it didn't happen. Yeah.
Ja, Frau Jajeźnia-Kwast hat sich hier.
Mrs. Jajeźnia-Kwast wrote into the chat that she has got a question to you, Mr. Tuma. Of course, you can ask each other questions. Just tell us. I really have a question, Mr. Tuma. Don't you think that in the future the discussion could be resumed, because in Poland we had the impression that we also had such periods where we thought that we don't need any more reappraisal or dealing with the past. In 2001, in the pre-election campaign, we dealt with the question of IPN, and it was said that this is no longer necessary. Alexander Kwaśniewski also posed his electoral campaign on the future. So we had such periods in Poland, and now this topic came back to us, and with such a might that nobody could have expected.
Well, it's hard to say if it will return again, but in case of the Czech Republic and Czech, say, public discourse, it really was there. So it dominated the media and to a certain extent the political discourse during, I don't know, 20 years after 1989 or maybe more. So then it disappeared. Now it's not a question that Babiš or someone else would say we don't need it. They simply don't speak about it at all, like if it doesn't exist. Well, maybe it will return in a certain way. Of course, there are cases when, I don't know, there was, for instance, a struggle about some statues in Prague last year, and some had to disappear and so on. So sometimes, but I think that the general public is not that much interested in this. So this is, as I see the situation now, that's the topic for historians, for political scientists, for sociologists, and so on, but not that much for general public, and not that much for policymakers. So how to say it?
Ja, die Vergangenheit.
Yeah, well, so the past seems to hardly play any role at all. So Mr. Moorbacher, this is very interesting. I'm very much interested in the situation in Slovakia. So with this joint communist past with the Czech Republic, and you said in your statement that former members of the Communist Party are still part of the democratic system, and that they hold office in the system. And I think it's really difficult to see or consider this being a guarantee for coming to terms with the communist past. So why is this happening? Do you think there is a lack of interest in the past when it comes to the greater public? So judges who tried to not to clarify criminal crimes committed, they have been retired. There haven't been any cleansing, or let's say clean up in the judiciary, but for, let's say, around about 30 years, so since 1989, former Stasi state security judges and members used their networks in order to consolidate, enhance their positions, and to keep them. And this is a fact, definitely. So I think our task is to write down their names, to publish their names, the dates, the facts, and because the public needs to know what happened when they come in contact with them. And do you think that people are interested in this, in the facts? Do you think there is general interest? Well, yes. So young people are definitely interested, or they're showing interest in it, and they get more information on and how to come to terms with the past, or how to deal with the past. And I think there are big problems, such as it is the task of the rule of law to reduce democracy, or that there are problems when it comes to the rule of law in the state. And I think that there has been corruption in the past, and now we need to overcome corruption. There have been corruption investigating judges have been arrested, and I think the way we need to deal with these phenomenons is to talk about the prosecution and persecution of the past, to publish their names, to publish the facts, to unveil what happened, to disclose what happened to the people due to the regime. I think this is what we need to do. This is our big task. And I think this is the summary of the situation. Are you okay with it, ladies and gentlemen? Or do you think, is it the same situation in Slovakia? So is it important to publish the names, the facts, so to hold them accountable for what they've done in the past? Is this happening? So we have a project going on in Slovakia. So there are judges, and we publish the judges' names, and we publish the names of the judges who who committed bad things in the past. So this is what we do, and we have a project dealing with judges, and we publish their names and their political crimes regarding immigration, who convicted people who wanted to leave the country in 1989, so trying to leave the country. So you think that this kind of past is dealt with, so the people are named, and it is also published what they've done. So I have a question coming from the audience to you, Mr. Moorbacher. What about this time of change, of this democratization of the 1990s in your country? How is it perceived? Does it play a role for young people in Slovakia? Does it play any role for them?
Das ist sehr bald nach der Gründung der
just after the after having founded the Organization for the National Memory, I think it was after 2003, journalists gathered documents on what happened in the past. So famous persons, popular persons, persons of the public life, of the communist secret police. And in doing so, scandals just popped up, and some of these public figures or famous popular figures of public life had to leave or step down from their positions in offices, and because this national memory organization became, I won't say dangerous for politicians with relations to the communist regime. But nevertheless, in doing so, there have been several nationalist and populist politicians saying that this Institute for National Memory needs to be, that, let's say, that this institute should not be taken seriously, and that it should be abolished. But nevertheless, I think one can say that the National Memory Institute is committing pressure, or is under pressure ever since its foundation. But it tries to act against this pressure and not to give up. So this institute does not have its own building, for example, and the government is fighting against the pandemic at the moment, but nevertheless, this government or our government promised to provide them with a proper building. So I think for younger people in Slovakia, for younger generations, they have to learn or they have to get to know the totalitarian systems and how to deal with them that influence or that governed these totalitarian forces that governed Slovakia in the past. So the regimes that have been driven by ideology and people. So what happened in the past in general? So for example, different, let's say, executors of different wills, and what happened in the past, and massive violations of human rights and freedoms and liberties. And this led to that people have been deprived to live. And you talked about this political pressure on the respective institution and the different institutions, and we have heard the same when it came to Poland. But so this influences, this is stopping kind of the process of coming to terms with the past. And my question is, or I'm always asking myself when it comes to this difficult situation regarding the accounting for the communist past, what are the different factors influencing this, and where
Druck sozusagen, also wie ja auch anscheinend
is, or what about society? What about the this is the will of society? And I think Stéphane Courtois, an author of the manual of the Black Book of Communism, said that it's about being ashamed. So shame, so that people have been involved, that they have been part of the system, that they have been forced to contribute to this. And this is a mass phenomenon, a mass protests, for example, like at the 1st of May. Do you think that shame plays a crucial role? So, Mr. Tuma, do you think it plays a crucial role, that shame plays a crucial role?
That's a question for me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a question for you, please.
I think people can forget. Sometimes I really wonder how people, I mean, just ordinary people, are able to put away from their memory and from their biography what they were doing before 1989, and they are very critical. I mean, actors, writers, journalists, and so on, so on. So generally to the communist regime, but when being asked about their own role, I think you mentioned, Prokopka mentioned, and so on, simply they refuse to speak about it or even likely to think about it. I don't know, for instance, if the same situation is in the other countries. If you read or if you listen to interviews, for instance, with actors, not only actors, but yeah, if you read their memoirs and so on, all of them were discriminated under the communist regime, according to what they think or say today. All of them were forbidden to have this or that role and so on. But if you really look on their demography and so on, most of them simply had their careers and they were positions in very different kinds of movies or so I think this is this issue that people are simply able to put away part of their own.
Herr Umari, wie ist das in Ungarn? Schieben dort
Mr. Umari, how is this in Hungary? Do many people put away with their past there? Yes, of course they do. But in this context, it's also interesting is the way how this happens. One example. 2 years ago, a memorial of the victims of the Council's Republic was reopened. This was an old memorial that stood in Hungary for some time, and the opening happened with a speech of the head of the Hungarian parliament. And in his speech, he said that the EU wants to participate and wants to continue with what the communists did. What is so nice about this is that today's parliament's president comes from a family in which both his parents and grandparents were convinced communists, and he himself was member of the communist youth organization. And this is not a crime, I don't want to put it that way. But this speech on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the new unification with China, with today's China, this is very interesting for me. Because how can you, on the one hand, speak up against communism and say that communism and all things connected to it are very dangerous, and on the other hand, you do business with China? I mean, the Germans do this as well, but they don't praise the Chinese system as a healthy variety of life. So I think this is much more interesting, and I think that it's even more interesting that people can forget things. I think most people aren't able to speak neutrally about the past. I mean, many people in Germany can tell us things of the last century, and but people don't reflect about National Socialism in the way historians do. But on the level of politics, neither Joseph Strauss nor Brandt or Genscher were people who would have dared to say that something that was right then can not be illegal today. This is something that the former Minister of Justice of Baden-Württemberg said, but then he had to bear the consequences of this. So I think what is new in Hungarian politics today is that there is verbal anti-communism on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are very close to Putin and to China. And we never had this in the Hungarian history. Hungary was always much more pro-West, but in the last decade, this has changed. You also criticized at the beginning that there is not enough support of the EU for independent structures, for example, for coming to terms with the past, for creating independent structures, for NGOs dealing with this topic, and so on. And you also criticized earlier that there is not enough interest of the West in the communist past of Hungary. Do you think this still holds true today? Do you think this is somehow connected and that this reinforces the politicized reappraisal or the fact that this reappraisal didn't take place? Yes, I really think that Germany is not very much interested, although Germany has experienced both dictatorships. The Western part was able to spare the communist dictatorship, and this is why the culture of remembrance of Germany is much more focused on National Socialism. I don't want to criticize this, but I want to add something else. The German foreign minister wrote in a publication that Germany is, there is a publication where Germany is named the sole offender of the Second World War. And if somebody writes this, then he says this shows a complete blindness about the responsibility of the Soviet Union and other states as well. And in history, there is no black and white when it comes to responsibility. Then things are very complex, and we should not tell our children that there is only one good side and only one bad side. In Germany, I think in the interest for the communist past was not always as intense as it should be. But I think this is for the Germans to judge and not for us Hungarians. Well, sometimes it helps if somebody points at some weak things from abroad. There is another question from the audience referring not to the communist but to the fascist past of Hungary, namely, does the Arrow Cross party still play a role for Hungary, for example, in school education? Yes, it does. It even plays different roles. On the one hand, at school, of course, the Arrow Cross history is taught. And in the public opinion and in the culture of remembrance, these stories usually culminate in the struggles that are fought at memorial days. Which we have. There was the battle, the day of the Battle of Budapest, which is a memorial day. And you have to ask yourself whether it was good or bad. Of course, you can say that it was bad because Budapest was completely damaged and 10,000s of people had to die. But you can also say that this was all very fine because we Hungarians, we had to we were the ones who spared Western Europe of the Asians and of the Bolsheviks. Of course, these are this is not my opinion, but these are opinions that are opinions that you can read, for example, in pro-government newspapers. They say that the defenders of Budapest, which
gefeiert worden.
well, National Socialists perceived as heroes, as the heroes who protected Europe. I think this is something that is unthinkable in Poland, in the Czech Republic, or in Slovakia. I think that there are no Polish National Socialists who defended Warsaw together with the Germans or something like that. But Hungary was an ally of the German Empire. Of course, it also played its own role, it had its own responsibility. And on the one hand, this is something that is denied. And on the other hand, people are proud of that and say the West is now accusing us of not abiding by human rights, although we were the ones who stopped the Russians from going further west. However, if Putin is so positive, then what is so bad about that? Mrs. Jajeźnia-Kwast, I would like to come back to Poland. We already mentioned this several times, and I would like to quote Basil Kerski again. You also mentioned him earlier, the director of the center, of the Solidarność Center in Gdansk. Of course, he cannot be accused of sharing the official view on history in Poland. However, he says that this historical revisionism in Poland, which also exists in Hungary, as we've just heard, that this revisionism in Poland can also be understood in a certain way, because he says that the Polish trauma is not taken into account enough in European politics of history. And it's not astonishing that the piece is telling Polish history. Can you understand that? Historiography is being influenced. And of course, I can't understand why this is happening. But Basil Kerski shares my opinion, and we don't understand how the government can interfere that strongly. But I think what he meant was that there is a certain ignorance. For example, when it comes to the time of the occupation in Poland, I myself was at a conference in Western Europe some years ago. It was a conference on economic cooperation between the occupied countries with Nazi Germany. And I was really shocked that my colleagues, historians from Norway, Sweden, Luxembourg, didn't have a clue that, for example, Polish economic elites were not able to cooperate, even if they had wanted to, because they were perceived as subhumans. So there was a huge ignorance on how different life was in the different occupied zones in Europe. And I thought a lot about this. Why is that so? Why don't they know about this? Or, for example, the situation of the Jews. Just recently at our center, we presented a new publication on Jewish communists who, thanks to the Soviet camps, were able to survive the Second World War. Just imagine, they came from one evil to the other, but the other evil saved their lives. So this is also something that has not been discussed yet in historiography and in historical science. And I mean, it is very simple to say that, but I think that we still have very many white spots which we should fill together with our colleagues and which we should talk about. And no matter how we talk about this school book commission on German and Polish school books, where people have been cooperating since the 1970s. And just recently, we finally published 4 school books. But no matter what you think about this, I think it's really correct that people come together and try to talk about history. Of course, there is not only one history. This is also a constructed view, but there are different views on one history. And the topic of our today's discussion also shows that it is clear that we cannot write a new history with the help of the Stasi records, because what is there is only a black and white history. And you also asked about this feeling of shame, of being ashamed. In Poland, there still is a narrative of victims and of heroes, and there's nothing in between. However, in reality, in between, there are about 20 million people who were neither offenders nor victims. They were just living in that time, and they were glad about, for example, modernization, which also happened in the communist country. And we shouldn't forget that there were also things happening at that time. Of course, that was different in Slovakia than in Poland, which was very much characterized by agriculture. But this is also a part of our history. And that is why it is so nice that we, for example, today have the opportunity to talk about our different views. I am a real fan of comparative history and of talking about different aspects together with my colleagues, also about the old networks. The old networks were the networks that were also active in the West. There was a lot of cooperation. There were scholarships. Maybe Poland is an exception in the socialist camp. It was always perceived as very open, as very pro-West. And Polish students, for example, were allowed to go abroad also in the communist time, and these scholarships also helped the Polish elites in their negotiations with the World Bank to meet old cliques, old friends. So they knew each other, people from Chicago and from Poland. And of course, this is very complex and very difficult. And it's very difficult to tell this story. And nevertheless, and I fully agree with Basil Kerski, I think it would be very good if there was more knowledge in the West about our history. And we also discussed this, that the European Commission should look to the East. It's not enough to scrutinize whether all these countries fulfilled everything in 2004, and then you stop checking them. It's just with children. You can't stop educating them when they are 5 years old, because then the development is not completed. And I think that we still have a lot to do in this aspect. Thank you very much, Mrs. Jajeśniak-Kwast. This was a very committed statement. You said that commemoration and reappraisal can never take place just within one's own borders. We have to be interested in each other. We have to know more about each other. We should never use our curiosity about each other. Commemoration and reappraisal should be an international task that nobody can fulfill just by themselves. I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for our today's discussion. It would be great if new networks could emerge, new structures for research, for discussions. I would also like to say thank you to all of the people listening to us tonight, also for your questions. Sorry that I was not able to read out all of the questions, but we had very interesting talks. And I would also like to say thank you to our two interpreters, Susanne Konczak and Michel Toussaint of Echo-Konferenz-Dolmetschen, who made it possible for us to understand each other. And I would be very happy if you could join us again on the 11th of May, when we will talk about remembering two dictatorships, the rivalry of dealing with the past in the Baltic states. Thank you very much and have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Thank you, Mrs. Kutscher, for being our moderator.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for invitation.